Okay. All right, and thank you for your patience. Couple computer issues and followed by a couple streaming issues. So, Biochem. With the topic, so there's fatty acid synthesis, yes? That's still week 2?
She didn't do it today, but she might do it tomorrow.
Okay. And what have you had so far this week then?
Beta oxidation and ketogenesis.
Okay. Ketosis being the one that we haven't hit yet because we did beta oxidation last week, yes?
Right.
So I think fatty acid synthesis people tend to have a little bit more difficulty with. So I'm going to hit that one and then we'll go to ketogenesis after that if we have time. But before we dive in, any questions on anything biochem?
Did you say you started with fatty acid synthesis?
Yeah, because most people find that one to be a little bit confusing. The pictures have a lot going on. And so, yeah, we'll go ahead and start with that. And then we can go to ketogenesis. But are there any concepts, questions for ketogenesis or anything else in biochem that we want to make sure we hit before we go into a pathway discussion?
Well, dialase, I think is used in both pathways of beta oxidation and ketogenesis. So I know in beta oxidation it's responsible for cleaving the peptide bonds.
Mm-hmm.
And
it's the last step
so
of
how
beta
does
oxidation.
it start at the beginning of ketogenesis? Like, what is it cutting?
So it's actually going in reverse. So the question was, what happens? Thiolase is both in beta oxidation and ketogenesis. What's the connection? So in beta oxidation, you have a big string, an acyl group, aka a fatty acid, and thiolase is the one that's doing the cutting off of 2 carbons at a time and turning that into acetyl-CoA, which will then acetyl-CoA, which will then go and be burned for energy, typically. But in ketogenesis, you see acetyl-CoA, and so I'm going to actually draw another acetyl-CoA because this is going to be fasting state. Actually, this one can be fasting state as well. So acetyl-CoA can be burned for energy just right there, but if the liver's okay, it's going to want to send that energy somewhere else where it's needed, and so you go into ketogenesis, which is an entire pathway, and the first step in that pathway is to take several acetyl-CoA molecules, and you're going to put them together, and you're going to be using the same enzyme that you just cut them with, and that's called thiolase.
So it can cut and lyse.
Right. And to make ketone bodies, you're putting them together in a slightly different way than they were before you cut them apart. That's why even though it's the same enzyme, and so you're going to end up with, after a few other enzymes, different products, the 3 ketone bodies. Acetoacetate, beta hydroxybutyrate, beta hydroxybutyrate, and then the useless one, acetone, which, by the way, that's a nice question. Which one of these doesn't produce any energy? Acetone.
Is that why it's able to diffuse?
Yes.
Okay.
Or it's a spontaneous. The reason we have it at all is because it's, I think when you said diffuse, you meant spontaneous.
Yeah, just leave.
And so
without a protein transporter. It can just diffuse out of our cells, right?
Right, okay, that's what you're saying. That's also, I believe that one's true. I haven't looked at the diffusal and transport as much, but with acetone, I'd imagine that you'd want it to be able to diffuse out of the body because it is a waste product. So that makes sense. But that's thiolase, and we'll get further into it. Any other questions for concepts, though, that we want to make sure we hit so that the PowerPoints make sense? Or even better, the topics make sense. Okay, then we will come back to this, hopefully, and fatty acid synthesis. So in fatty acid synthesis, we have a bunch of extra energy, and we want to store that for later use, and so we're going to make fat, everybody's favorite American molecule. So we are going to start where all of the pathways seem to start, in the liver for one thing. But we're going to go ahead and have glucose come in. It goes down glycolysis, and then it goes into the mitochondria, and we have acetyl-CoA. Now, acetyl-CoA, once it's inside the mitochondria and it's been converted, making fatty acids, we're going to make them pretty long, and they can actually get so that mitochondria aren't able to handle a whole bunch of them, which is why sometimes if you have you guys had fatty acid breakdown yet? I can't remember if that one comes first or second. Maybe not. Oh yeah, beta oxidation, there we go. Well, one little side thing in beta oxidation that we didn't touch on is that it's medium and short chain fatty acids that go through beta oxidation in the mitochondria. The long chain and very long chain fatty acids, they don't fit in the mitochondria. And so they need to go somewhere else into the peroxisome, peroxidases. And the peroxisome will take care of them. And so we're not going to be making fatty acids inside the mitochondria because they can get unwieldy, and we wouldn't want to also pack our mitochondria full of fat in case we want there to be more space. And since we're not breaking it down, we would want to make it outside. So the first thing we're going to do is we make citrate, which is normal for the TCA cycle, and citrate can leave the mitochondria. There's a citrate transporter, and the enzyme to make citrate, does anyone remember the first enzyme of the TCA cycle from all those many weeks ago?
Citrate synthase.
Citrate synthase. All right, so citrate synthase to make citrate, and then citrate is going to, there were two ingredients to make citrate, acetyl-CoA and oxaloacetate. So when citrate leaves, you're essentially sending out an acetyl-CoA and an oxaloacetate, and we have an enzyme called citrate lyase. We're going to find a way back in, because if we don't have oxaloacetate, the TCA cycle can't continue, and that's bad. Whereas the acetyl-CoA is now free to go and be chained together into fatty acids. Okay? So, quick question, fed state or passive state?
Fed state.
Fed state. All that excess energy, we're trying to save it. And then, oxaloacetate is going to do a loop. Just citrate comes out, citrate lyase cuts it, oxaloacetate goes back in. We'll talk about the malate. There's a malate shuttle. Malate shuttle system that helps this happen. And we will talk about that after we talk about the... No, we can talk about it now. We'll talk about the shuttle system, and then we'll go to acetyl-CoA and actually making the fatty acids. So, oxaloacetate has to make it back inside. But there's not a transporter just for oxaloacetate. So we need to turn it into something that does have a transporter. And it turns out we've got two options. The easiest way to think about this, I think, is just to always, even though the molecule name is changing, just remember it's still oxaloacetate, just tweaked a little bit. So you have oxaloacetate, and you can either take the short way in with one enzyme and then the transporter, or you can take, and so one enzyme, or you can take the long way in, two enzymes, and then the transporter. What's the difference? Another enzyme. Thank you, Smart Alan. All right. The difference is that the second enzyme gives you energy outside the mitochondria, and so it stays in the cytosol. Whereas if you take the short way, then this short way right here is going to take that energy and actually give it to you inside the mitochondria. So the idea is, do you want to have more of the energy outside or more of the energy inside? And that's why you have two different ways that you can go in. That way you can have an energy distribution type thing. So The short way in, you'll go in as malate. The long way in, you change it one more time, and it's back to pyruvate. And then those can come in. The enzyme names, the first one is going to be malate dehydrogenase, named after the molecule it's going to be coming in as. This other one, the second one, is just malic enzyme because they were super creative. Okay, so bunch of words. Just remember, there's the short way in, energy inside the cell, long way in, energy outside the cell. Make sense? You do want to know the words, but when the concept makes sense, it's easier to memorize all the junk. So, since my writing is probably too small and difficult to read, I'll say it again. I can see some peering going on. Oxaloacetate is acted on by malate dehydrogenase, which turns it into malate. Malate can then go inside, and then there is another enzyme inside. I believe it's another malate dehydrogenase, but it makes it go the other way and produces energy. Okay? Or you can keep going, and malic enzyme will turn the malate into pyruvate. You make an NADPH, and then the pyruvate can go inside. All right, any questions?
What
Please.
determines if it's going to stay, it's going to go inside? I mean, it's going to go inside no matter what.
Right.
But which route, like, how is it decided? Like, depending upon how much energy it's inside of the cytosol, or?
The regulation, I haven't seen anything touching on it. Hypothetically speaking, it would be energy levels of one or the other.
Concentration?
Yeah, concentration that would be regulating if this second enzyme is more active, probably. It's probably this malic enzyme that's being regulated, because if that's active enough, then it would grab the malate before it went through the transporter. So it's probably cytosol levels of NADPH regulating malic enzyme would make the most sense. Any other questions?
What can you do with NADPH?
Two things. One of them we're learning about now. You actually use NADPH for fatty acid synthesis. And so it makes sense that we're going to try and make NADPH outside as soon as we run low in the same system. It's beautiful. The other thing you can do is NADPH is used for making nucleic acids. So anytime your cell's dividing, then you're going to make a ton of nucleic acids. You're going to want to have a lot of NADPH. And so there's a particular pathway that has a lot of P's in it. The pentose phosphate pathway is the other place you get a lot of NADPH. And that also makes nucleic acids, so they tend to run together. The ones that need it also try to make it.
So at the beginning of this, you started with acetyl-CoA?
Yep. Acetyl-CoA became citrate after combining with oxaloacetate. You have citrate synthase, goes through the transporter. Citrate is acted on by citrate lyase. And I like to notice that the two enzymes are basically identical. It's just one's synthesizing, one's breaking. So synthase, lyase, and then this whole thing.
So this is the mitochondria?
Yeah,
And
the
cytosol.
inner blue bubble is the mitochondria. The outer blue bubble is the cytosol of the liver cells, hepatocytes. Question back there?
Empty green box.
Empty green box right there. I believe that one is malate dehydrogenase on the inside, and it's producing energy.
So it's not going back to OAA?
It is. So both of these will end up making an oxaloacetate again.
And then it's going to go into TCA.
Right. Because if you ever run out of oxaloacetate, your entire TCA is broken, can't do anything, all energy is gone and stopped. That's bad. All right. Good deal. So,
So this is only when acetyl-CoA is an unsaturated fatty or uneven number of fatty acid and goes from acetyl-CoA to the propanoic acid?
So good question. I can kind of see why you would go that way. So to restate the question, you noticed pyruvate is there, and we said that fatty acids can only make pyruvate when they are odd chain fatty acids.
Right.
Now, the thing is, this pyruvate is not allowed to go back up and create glucose, because then we would never replace the oxaloacetate. And that would mean, technically, you could use this pyruvate once, and then the oxaloacetate is gone, and you can't do any fatty acid synthesis, you can't do almost anything. It would totally wreck the mitochondria. And so you can't make usable pyruvate. And so this is not an odd chain fatty acid, it's just a pyruvate that we aren't allowed to touch, because otherwise we would throw the entire mitochondria out of whack. Make sense? So it's as though we couldn't make pyruvate. It's just an intermediate in this case. Did that make sense? Because I know that is kind of...
Confusing.
Yeah.
That's fine.
Okay.
So pyruvate's gonna be coming in because you're getting it in, glycolysis?
Beta oxidation. So, excuse me. So, let me say this again. Sorry, your question took me to beta oxidation. So we have glucose going on, and so this is fed state. Thank you for bringing me back to the right pathway here. That what I said previously was correct for beta oxidation, but we're in fed state now. So thank you for bringing that up. That means that we have a lot of glucose, and pyruvate is going to be regulated to go back inside anyway, because that's where all pyruvate is going. And so we don't have any need to make more glucose. And whenever this pathway is running, we wouldn't need to make more glucose, and so the pyruvate wouldn't be used up. Also, this acetyl-CoA, since it was coming from glucose, if it did go back up, it still wasn't from fat. It was from glucose, because we're in fed state.
Taylor, would you mind just running through the whole thing one more time?
Not at all. All right. So, fed state means high glucose. Glucose goes through glycolysis. We end up with acetyl-CoA inside the mitochondria. We combine that with oxaloacetate to make citrate, because we have enough energy and now we're going to be storing all the extra, so we're not going to do the rest of the TCA cycle. Instead, we're going to do the storage cycle, or lipogenesis, or fatty acid synthesis, whatever you want to call it. So all the citrate, instead of continuing through the TCA cycle, now is going to go out through the citrate transporter, CT, and then citrate lyase will cut the citrate we'll cut it apart, and oxaloacetate will go through this sequence to get back inside. Acetyl-CoA will go and be turned into fat. The sequence is oxaloacetate will be turned into malate using malate dehydrogenase, and then that can go inside. Or if you want more NADPH, then you can go one more step before allowing it to go inside and let malic enzyme go to malate, which turns it into pyruvate, and then that goes inside.
So on the citrate ligase step, you have both acetyl-CoA plus OAA. Whatever gets cut produces them two products.
Yes, so citrate is what comes out. Citrate, oh geez. Citrate makes both of those. Acetyl-CoA as well as oxaloacetate, because those are the two pieces you use to make it. So literally it's just put them together, transport them out, take them apart, and then go through a bunch of junk to get the other guy back inside.
So if we're in the mitochondria, where's the NADPH point?
The NADPH will, if it's inside the mitochondria, then it's probably going to go through the electron transport chain.
So it's not really going up, it's kind of just looping around, going back into the mitochondria.
So if the NADPH was made outside in the cytosol, it'll go and be used for whatever pathway needs it. If it's the one that's made inside, because you took the short path, then that'll just go through the electron transport chain. NAD, and the one inside technically is an okay. So the way that I would go over this in review is this messy thing. I would do that by itself. The rest of it is actually pretty simple. Just citrate, make and break, then you're ready. And so when reviewing let's go ahead and take a few seconds to review the simple bit, and then we'll move forward to the complicated. I guess we can do both, because that we at the right point. Does that make sense? Okay. Take a few more seconds. All right. Any questions pop up during that? Okay. So the next part is, I'm going to go ahead and erase this so I can write bigger this next time. This next part is the one that people tend to have fun with not having fun with, but it isn't too bad. So we have acetyl CoA, and we want to make a long chain of carbons, so it makes sense that one of the things we're going to do is make acetyl-CoA get carboxylated, meaning add a carbon. K is used in the blood for carboxylation, so that is true in clotting, which is in physiology. Great. That's the exception, though. Usually it is B7, and so that's something you should know. And the enzyme is going to be acetyl-CoA carboxylase, or ACC. And that's going to make us a 3-carbon molecule called malonyl CoA.
You also need energy to carboxylate?
In this case, so I do, however, know that this is also, this little asterisk here, this is the step of no return. This is the committed step.
Right here.
Yeah, acetyl-CoA carboxylase. And now, in the cytosol, there is a freaking huge protein. It is called fatty acid synthase. And this protein has 2 really important arms. One of them is called the ACP site, or ACP arm. The other one's called the cysteine site, or cysteine arm. And each of these can hold molecules while they're dealing with them. These arms are going to go ahead and pass things in between them. And the guy who passes them, all of the things that are going to be held in the arms are either going to be acetyl-CoA or malonyl-CoA. And so it makes sense that the passer dude is going to be named malonyl acetyl-CoA transferase. Malonyl acetyl-CoA or acetyl transferase, MAT. So MAT is just saying I can move both malonyl and acetyl-CoA and transfer them between the 2 arms. This enzyme is part of this huge protein. It's not something floating around in the cytosol. This guy has lots of different things inside of himself, and that's one of them. So,
What is the FAS?
fatty acid synthase.
And the 2 arms, one was cysteine and the other one is
ACP, or acyl. Remember, acyl is another word for fatty acid. ACP carrier protein. Basically, it says, I hold fat. So we're going to name the bottom one ACP, top one cysteine, and then the ACP site, and this is the thing that makes it pretty easy, and this is, if you take just this away, then that's good to start with. The ACP is the guy who always receives the new molecule coming in, okay? Cysteine is just a hold on to this while I grab the new molecule kind of a spot. So the ACP site will always grab anything new coming in. He's the catcher, okay? Now, what happens, I'm going to go ahead and get some room here. I need to get better at drawing big and having room. I'm used to like 5-person tutor rooms. So there are 2 cycles of what happens with the fatty acid synthase. Cycle 1 is the activation cycle where you have acetyl-CoA come in and bind to the ACP site. And then it gets passed up to the cysteine site because there's another molecule coming in as soon as the acetyl-CoA binds and says, hey, get ready, there's stuff coming. I'm out here in the cytosol where I'm not normally, therefore you know that malonyl-CoA must be coming too, because that's the only reason I'd be out here is if most of me is being turned into malonyl-CoA. So now that it's all ready, and the acetyl-CoA then we can have the next new molecule come into the new molecule place, ACP site. And that's going to be malonyl-CoA. So malonyl-CoA comes down there. Next thing that happens is we want to get this chain really long. And so, I know the chair, right? So malonyl-CoA needs to be able to accept the acetyl-CoA. And so we just go ahead and make malonyl-CoA sticky by knocking the CoA off, which leaves an open spot that you can stick something to. And that means the acetyl-CoA can come down and stick to the other side of the malonyl-CoA. Does that make sense?
No.
Okay. Well, I'm going to say one thing that happens after this so that we've done the whole cycle, and then we'll say it another way because I brought some stuff that hopefully will be fun and make sense. After this, when the acetyl-CoA is right here, and so then they are together, acetyl-CoA, and so now you have both of them lined up together like Legos. There are little fiddly bits that are on each of these molecules that have to be taken off. They're double bond oxygens, and you get rid of those by putting hydrogens in place. And so you put a hydrogen here and dehydratase, which we will talk about further to get rid of this. So I will go into this in more detail.
Does this say COX-2?
No, this doesn't have to do with COX-2. That's in the blood with Phys.
Yes, what's that?
Malonyl-CoA and acetyl-CoA stuck together, and then you take off the oxygen off the side, and then that's a full cycle. And now let me show you rather than writing on the board.
Yes.
Because I know that this one's really obnoxious, especially since there are so many little steps. All right, can I have someone come up and help and hold stuff?
Sure.
Awesome. Thank you, Thomas. Okay, so if you'll just stand right there, and right hand, ACP site, just like this.
That's my right hand.
Okay, and then just, so we're gonna have one going like this, and then your left hand will be the cysteine site, and we'll be loading up the boxes from the crook of your elbow out. So, first thing that happens, acetyl-CoA. Thank you, Thomas. Your sacrifice is appreciated. All right, first thing that happens, acetyl-CoA comes in to the ACP site. That's going to activate it. Acetyl-CoA. We have malonyl-CoA. So malonyl-CoA can now come into the new spot and bind. And next, that means we can move this back and have it build out into a chain. But right now, there's something in the way of the binding spot on the malonyl-CoA. And so we're going to take off one of the carbons, and then the acetyl-CoA is able to stick where the carbon used to be. So this will then move back over here, stick like that. And that's where we got to on the board. Now, there's actually a double bond oxygen. It's a fatty acid, because a saturated fatty acid is what we're making, and that means all of it should be covered in hydrogens. So once we've gotten to this point, the next thing that we want to do is have some enzymes that get rid of this oxygen. There are 3 enzymes, 2 for the oxygen, and then 1 to get rid of a double bond. Okay? So we have a reductase and a dehydratase. And I'll write those up over here. Okay? Reductase, dehydratase. And these 2 take care of the double bond oxygen. And the reductase uses the NAD pH that we talked about. And it uses that hydrogen. Each of these bonds that the oxygen has wants to stick to something. And so if we stick a hydrogen there in place, then one of those bonds is no longer holding on to the oxygen. So we stick a hydrogen there, and that makes the oxygen really easy to take off, and the dehydratase flicks it off. Make sense? So one bond is the reductase, the other one is the dehydratase. The reductase uses the hydrogen to weaken the bond, and then the dehydratase twists it off now that there's only one bond holding it there.
You use the same ones to eliminate the double bond between the malonyl and the acetyl-CoA in the middle? Use the same enzymes?
For the double bond, that's just what I was coming over here, is another reductase. And it uses another NADPH. And this is for the double bond. Okay? And once you get there, then all the oxygens have been taken off, and so now you need a new molecule to come in. So these guys can be transferred over. So the new molecule can come in. I stuck the CoA. There's our CoA. Knock the CoA off. Stick those guys on. And then you have another double bond oxygen. And that knocks this off. Then you move these out like this, and then you have another one come in, and you just keep doing that. Basically, you have molecule come in, knock off the CoA, stick the previous chain on the end, knock off the oxygen. Repeat.
The second reductase, and you said that cleaving the double bond. What double bond was that?
Thanks, Thomas. The double bond is in the middle of the carbon chain.
Okay.
And so in between the 2 carbons on each of the molecules, whether it's acetyl-CoA or malonyl-CoA, there's a double bond. And you have to have a single bond so that it has as many hydrogens attached as possible, because that single bond will be bent out to accept a hydrogen rather than being stuck to a carbon.
And then, how long does that go on?
Good question. It goes on until the length of the chain is between 14 and 18 carbons long, and there are specific names for the different lengths. And I think there was a particular length that she was pegging as it stops here. Does anyone have what her end length was? I think it was 14, which I think is palmitic acid, was what. Does anyone have that up so we can confirm? 16? Okay. Then 16. I remember she liked palmitic was a stopping point, so 16. Awesome. Okay. So, yeah, any other questions?
What did ACP stand for?
ACP, let's see, that was acetyl-CoA carrier protein. Yes, thank you.
This isn't the same thing as tag synthesis.
No, that happens right after this.
Okay.
So
That's what our next slide says. For tomorrow.
as soon as your next slide set. So if you're doing tag synthesis before this, that's interesting.
Yeah.
But this leads to tag synthesis next. This is how you get the fatty acids. And then you take the fatty acids and you make tags out of them.
What is this called?
This is fatty acid synthesis. It's the whole pathway. And the molecule that makes the stuff is fatty acid synthase, the giant protein.
So how does this play in with the other one? Is that glucose still relevant, or is that just still up on the board?
That's kind of, I mean, it's the beginning of where it comes. So glucose gets made into acetyl-CoA, acetyl-CoA gets made into citrate, citrate gets made into
Okay, so we're talking
everything.
basically where you left off with the acetyl-CoA is where you pick it up here.
Right, so it's all part of one pathway.
We're making fatty acids and we're in fed state.
We have, so we're fed state. We have all of the, go ahead.
I think it's like if you eat just a tiny bit, then it's going to go and turn into fat. Not necessarily if that's if you're eating decent or amount of meal, more than enough actually. Usually it's more than enough, and then it becomes the body's like, all right, we have enough.
Or, yeah,
What we're going to do with this leftover?
Mm-hmm.
so we've reached our storing capacity here. After we,
Right, so
okay.
what was your name again?
John.
John? Like John was saying, if you have excess eaten, then that's what we're storing with this. And fed state is as soon as you hit blood glucose levels are elevated from dietary availability, rather than you making it from glycogen or something. And that's what regulates it. Really? Okay, well.
And then right after, we're doing.
She did a lot of things backwards.
We got it in week 2 Monday. So can I make a request of you guys? If someone would be willing to send me the slides that you guys are actually doing, she's changed the order and a few of the slides. If someone would email me that, I'll be sure and stay with you guys. The schedule would be good, but she's changing her slides too. The schedule would be great if someone's also willing to send the actual slide set, so I know what you guys are actually being taught these days. That'd be great.
I think she hasn't posted any of her slides.
So they've gone past the tag. No.
Okay. You'll be getting this unless she's gotten rid of it altogether. All right. So that's what we got there. Let's see what time we've got. All right, that's about the hour, but we have about 8 minutes left, which is roughly how long ketogenesis can take. So let's dive into that. Any questions while I'm erasing though?
Does ACP cleave the CoA off?
To cleave the CoA off, but she doesn't expect you to know the name of that. At least she didn't expect us to. One other thing, the giant fatty acid synthase, it works all by itself, but it actually has a twin on its back, so there are always 2 of them together. They don't work together, like they're not helping each other, but they are stuck together, so it's a dimer protein.
How does that work? If they don't work together, but they're stuck together, are they working separately?
Yeah, they have their arms facing out other ways. Okay. So, ketogenesis. All right, so we're going to go ahead and have TCA is we're inside the mitochondria. Mitochondria. And we have acetyl-CoA. And we've used acetyl-CoA. The liver doesn't need more energy, and so it's trying to ship it out in a readily available state, so the rest of the body can use it as sort of emergency fuel. Okay, we're in starvation state, or fasting state at the very least. So this acetyl-CoA has come from beta oxidation. So we've gotten the fat already, put it through the liver. Now we have a bunch of acetyl-CoA, and now the liver is ready to take that and use it to help the rest of the acetyl-CoA is going to be acted on, like we mentioned earlier, by thiolase. And that's going to have acetyl-CoA times 2. You're going to put those together, and so now it's going to be called basically acetyl-CoA, but that's too long to say, so we shorten it to aceto. Acetyl-aceto. There we go. I have to be writing it and saying it at the same time. Acetyl-acetoacetate. Acetyl-acetate.
You said this is just another name for 2 acetyl-CoAs?
Yeah. All right. And verify if anyone can pop the slides up. I didn't prep up for this one, so the names, I am notorious for being one syllable off in my names, just so you guys know, unless I've prepped. So
It's aceto.
aceto-acetyl acetate.
Right?
Acetyl-CoA.
Acetyl-acetyl-CoA.
CoA. Thank you. That's why we want to have those up. But trying to give you what you actually, have going on at the moment. So let's see. Next, we're going to have kind of a sandwich of HMG. If you guys remember the pyruvate sandwich, we now have an HMG-CoA sandwich. HMG-CoA synthase, followed by the molecule HMG-CoA. And then on the other side, we have HMG-CoA lyase. So it's just a sandwich of HMG, 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 synthesize it, lyse it. But when we break it in a different place, and so it makes a different molecule. HMG-CoA lyase. And that makes acetoacetate. Acetate. And that's where that guy goes. And that is our first of the ketones. There are 3 ketones. Okay? Acetoacetate. And acetoacetate can spontaneously, meaning without an enzyme, change into acetone, which is a waste product, gives you no energy, and is really rough on the blood vessels. Or, using an enzyme, we can get beta hydroxy. Okay, and this is going to be beta hydroxybutyrate. I'm just going to put beta HB dehydrogenase for our enzyme. And if it's a dehydrogenase, we know that there is energy being made or used, and in this case, we are using energy. We take an NADH and turn it into NAD. So we just spent energy to make this last ketone. And the reason we're doing that is because the liver has all the energy it needs. And so it's trying to make the most energetically expensive molecule that it can to send out to the organs that need it. It's kind of like if one city had plenty of food and another city was starving, you would find in your care boxes, you would be packing as much calorie-dense stuff as you could. And if you could wrap it in something edible, you'd do that too. It's like put as much energy into that thing as possible. So that's why we have this last step where acetoacetate, good. Beta hydroxybutyrate, 3 ATP better. And then you can ship it out. And this is synthesis. Any questions on this side of it?
What letter is that in the dehydrogenase box? I'm sorry. Is that a P?
This was a beta symbol, so it's got a,
So it's BHB?
yeah, it's beta HB. And that's beta hydroxybutyrate dehydrogenase. And it should be in the slides. So
So no energy on one side, and then you have the NAD, that pH that's fair on the other side.
if by no energy you mean this one
Yes.
does no energy, correct. And that was actually the question I was going to throw out there. Which one's useless? Acetone. And it's also acetone that can give you, you can smell the acetone sometimes. If someone's in,
Ketogenesis.
yeah, ketoacidosis. So, I want to give some time for Phys, and in Phys we're probably going to do more of a, well, we'll see. There are some things we can go into, but I didn't have any slide set. No one uploaded it for us, so it'll be mostly QA. But on the other end, the one thing that I do want to touch on is that when you get to the cell that is receiving, you can have beta hydroxybutyrate or acetoacetate coming in, and both of them come in from the blood. If it's beta hydroxybutyrate, it's going to be, and I'm saying this multiple times because it's something that she likes and it's something that's pertinent. There's going to be an extra enzyme. It's going to be the same one, beta hydroxybutyrate dehydrogenase, except this time it's working in the other way. So this one was costing us a hydrogen. This one's going to earn the target cell. So wherever we are in the body, the muscle, the brain, who cares, whatever. Anything but a red blood cell, basically. Red blood cells do not do this. They don't have mitochondria. So not RBC. Anywhere else, pretty much. And this is going to give us plus NADH. Then after that, it's going to go into the TCA cycle. However, to turn acetoacetate into the things that are going to go into the TCA cycle, succinyl-CoA, which was, do you guys remember succinyl-CoA in the TCA cycle? That turns into succinate. And in between those steps, if you remember from succinyl-CoA to succinate, you usually get 1 GTP or 1 ATP, basically the same thing. But in this case, and this is the part I wanted to make sure and say because it's the part that people, the rest of this is kind of just, it's a pathway and the concept can make sense. This bit is the part that some people find a little bit interesting, is that this green 1 GT ketones, the succinyl-CoA helps them with this next step. And so the way that it helps them is it goes through different enzymes, and in the middle of its pathway, it helps acetoacetate go back to acetyl-CoA, but by so doing, it never gets the enzyme that's supposed to make the GTP in its little side pathway. So you don't get that 1 GTP. And when she asks you a question, she's going to say, how much do you get out of beta hydroxybutyrate? Well, you get an acetyl-CoA times 2, because it took 2 acetyl-CoA to make the base. So that's 10 times 2. And you get, since it's a beta hydroxybutyrate, you get the NADH, which is basically plus 3 ATP right there. So you're at 23. And then right here, because you did this little side pathway, minus 1, because you couldn't, the succinyl-CoA didn't get to make its GTP. Make sense?
Is there ever a scenario where you make it and keep it now?
Succinyl-CoA didn't get to make its GTP. Make sense?
Is there ever a scenario where you make it and keep it now?
Not with ketones, no, thankfully. That would be horrendously unfair. So
we're at, so then acetyl, so what are we at, 22 or?
22. 22 for a beta hydroxybutyrate. 22 for beta hydroxybutyrate. And for acetoacetate, you just take 3 off of that. Acetoacetate, 19. Question back there.
I'm kind of confused why you subtract one GTP because it's not like you're using it, you're just not making it.
Right, and so the net, the opportunity cost, as business people would call it, the net is 1 less. So you technically didn't use it up, but not making it ends up meaning the same thing to the cell. There's 1 less around than there should be. Because if you think about it, that succinyl-CoA probably came from an acetyl-CoA going through its TCA cycle that's supposed to make 10. But if the succinyl-CoA got hijacked, it only made 9.
So
And-
TCA is happening not because we're in the fed state, but because we're making a zero color from this.
TCA happens in a lot of times. It's the one that makes energy, whether you're using it from starvation fuel or fed fuel, still runs. So, and in this case, this one would be running it for energy because you're inside the starving cells. This one would be running it for energy because you're inside the starving cells.
So we're back into the mitochondria of the cell here.
Not a liver cell, but yes. So anywhere else in the body. This is the starving city. This is the city with a bunch of food. Liver sends all the extra. All right. Good deal. Any last questions before we close up?
The stuff in the blue is in the liver mitochondria?
Yes. Stuff in the blue is in the liver mitochondria.
And then that this dehydrogenase reaction needs a B7 as well at the top, the square enzyme.
That's beta hydroxybutyrate dehydrogenase, gives you an extra NADH.
Does it require a B7?
No.
No.
B7 was in the other pathway for
Okay.
lipid genesis,
Okay.
lipogenesis. All
I
right.
thought that all the dehydrogenase needed like vitamins 2 or 3 or something like that, like a. No.
Na is
Okay,
vitamin
yeah,
D3. So you were right.
Okay.
Why did you subtract, where did you go from 22 to 19?
So there's beta hydroxybutyrate,
Yeah.
gives you 22 after you take out the GTP, right?
Mhm.
And then acetoacetate is something that also gets sent because not all of it has time to be made into beta hydroxybutyrate, so you're getting both of them. And so 3 less than 22 is what you end up with, and that's 19.
Okay.
So there's the expensive one or calorie dense one, and then there's the cheaper one, energy speaking. So that one's 22, that one's 19 after you take out the GTP.
What's the enzyme between aceto?
Is it the same enzyme that does succinyl-CoA? Is that just like a cysteine?
It might be, I don't remember.
I can look it up, but there is an
Please do.
enzyme.
There is an enzyme, yeah. All right. So let's go ahead and with Phys, what was your topic? Maybe you guys just kept going through the same PowerPoint on blood.
We did.
Yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. Like, there's a new Phys topic. Actually, that would be exciting. Fun stuff. That's actually nice.
Extraction ratio on product pressure is
Okay, cool. Extraction ratio. So yeah, let's just take this small topic at a time because as I recall, we can do a bunch of blood stuff together. That works well. Extraction ratio is kind of its own little thing.
Do you want me to pull the slide up?
So first, let's lay out arteries are the biggest vessels moving away from the heart. Awesome, thanks. After that, we have the smaller, which are called arterioles. And then the smallest guys, which are called capillaries. And you can have artery side capillaries, and then you can have venous or vein side. And you can have artery side capillaries, and then you can have venous or vein side capillaries. Capillaries are the smallest guys. They're at the target where you're trying to do gas and nutrient exchange. So they have a lot of little holes in the side of them. And so they're very porous relative to other ones. So if these big ones are arteries, completely, whatever, spell it however you want. Arterioles are the medium ones, and then capillaries are the small guys. And they have artery side and vein side. After that, you have veins going to venules. Capillary veins going to venules, going to veins proper. And that's better. Now, extraction ratio, we just said that capillaries let stuff out, in and out. Extraction ratio is how much gets let out between, say, arterioles. Let's just say that there is 70 stuff, whatever you're measuring, gases typically. And then in the veins, you see that, the venules, you see that there's 50 stuff, gases, CO2, O2. O2 in particular is what this would be. And so the extraction ratio is really, if you guys remember how to do percentages, just like it's basically a percentage ratio. They just throw in a bunch of Ca minus Cv inside all over Ca. And it's like, that's just another way of doing percentage. So if you remember how to find a percent of something, they just used a lot of constants that look like, that are science, like capillaries, yay. The way you do this is 70 was here. There's only 50 left. Therefore, how much went out? 20. And then we make it a percent by saying 20 out of 70 is what left. And so 20 divided by 70 would give you whatever percentage, whatever ratio. And that's the amount that was extracted, hence extraction ratio. Let's do one quick practice problem and then we'll move on because this one's not too bad. If I had someone come in and we did a blood gas and they had 85 on the artery side and then they had 40 on the vein side, first tell me what would, try to set up the equation of where you'd stick all the numbers, and then you have all the information to be able to do it. So try to figure out where you'd stick all the numbers, preferably without looking at the previous example. And then if you can stick all the numbers in the right place, then you're good. So we'll take 10, 15 seconds.
Smells good.
Whatever that works out to be would be your extraction ratio. All right. Now, any questions on that? Okay, next, let's zoom in on the capillaries. That exchanging process has some fun stuff. And so let's go ahead and draw a nice long capillary here. We're super zoomed in. And we're going to have a little divider here. Let's say that this is artery side, this is vein side. So there are holes in the capillaries. And that allows fluid and small things to get out or in. Big things can't fit. The big thing that we usually think of is, does anyone know what the protein is? It's our favorite. Albumin. Yes. All right. So, organ makes albumin, liver. So if you have liver problems, your albumin levels are going to go down. Just bear that junk is going to leave. So we're talking about capillary filtration. All right. There's some other terms you can use for it, but basically how much can leave. You have hydrostatic pressure. And then you have, I'm going to get rid of the word artery right there. Hydrostatic pressure. And then you have oncotic pressure. So, hydrostatic pressure is basically blood pressure, but we're talking about in the capillaries. Okay? So, on the artery side, we would have, I'm actually going to write that in red so we can keep this color-coded. Hydrostatic pressure. On the artery side, we have pretty high hydrostatic pressure. If you have a high blood pressure in here, is that going to make more fluid leave or more fluid stay inside? Leave. It's just like a garden hose. The more you put in there, the more those little sprinkler things are going to shoot water out through the little holes. Oncotic pressure needs a little bit of an explanation. Thankfully, it's not as complicated as the word makes it sound, or at least as complicated as it made it sound to me when I first heard it. When you understand that albumin actually has magnetic charges, it's actually got a bunch of little negative charges around it, which is why it is hydrophilic instead of hydrophobic. And water is partially charged. O, the O has a delta or partial negative, and the hydrogen has a partial packed water molecule is probably going to rotate. You'll have this one fall off, a new one will stick there. That one will fall off, a new one will stick there. But overall, it is a water magnet because it's charged. Albumin is too big to leave the capillaries. So oncotic pressure is basically water magnet pressure that does not leave the capillaries. So if you have high oncotic pressure, is that going to make water leave the capillaries more or stay in the capillaries more? Stay, come in. Stay and or come in, correct. So if you have high oncotic pressure, you've got a bunch of water magnets that are going to be bringing it in. Now, let's talk about the two sides. On the artery side, we have basically as much blood pressure, hydrostatic pressure, as you're going to get because it's closest to the heart. Very few things have leaked out yet because you haven't crossed any capillaries, and most of the other blood vessels don't leak stuff that much. And so you have a net exit of electrolytes, fluids, anything small enough to fit through those little holes because of the pressure. And it goes out into the interstitial space. The interstitial space is just anywhere in between the cells. And after you lose a bunch of fluid, on the other side, you only have a little bit of hydrostatic pressure left. But you still have a lot of oncotic pressure. Because now you've lost a lot of fluid, but the proteins all stayed there, and so you have a lot of protein left and not much water. And so you can actually have fluid come back in to the blood vessels on the venous side of the capillaries. So that's the main stuff for concepts. I'm going to throw in a couple other things that are probably in your slides, but this is the part that if it conceptually makes sense, you should be able to reason out all the other stuff more or less. Here's the other stuff that might be in there, and if you have a question on it, let me know. There's going to be some constant that I don't remember what it is. I'm just going to put P for perfusion or permeability, like how many holes are in the blood vessels. The liver has huge gaping holes. Capillaries have a lot of little holes. And also, if the interstitial space has a lot of fluid, then technically it gets its own outside of the capillary pressure that fights back. So you can have hydrostatic pressure in the capillaries pushing out, and then interstitial pressure, hydrostatic pressure, countering that. And so that's something that plays in, but frankly, if you understand that water, the more that is there, the more pressure there is, then throwing in a whole other thing and making this look like a mess isn't worth it. conceptually, this is what I stick with personally. But interstitial space has fluid as well. That'll push back. So you can have capillary, hydrostatic, and oncotic, and then you can have interstitial, hydrostatic, and oncotic. But capillary is the one that the only one anyone cares about. But I wanted to mention it in case you were going through and like, what's going on? There's 2 hydrostatics all of a sudden. All right. So the last thing, how do we get rid of all of that extra fluid? Because not all of it comes back in. Lymph vessels. Amber.
Are these pressures different in different capillaries of the body? Like,
Yes. Yep. Depending on where you are in the body, how far away it is from the heart, that'll change the pressures. The oncotic pressure tends to be more consistent because it's a concentration of protein. But the farther you are from the heart, that changes the hydrostatic pressure.
Can you just go over the oncotic pressure one more time? You said that it's charged, so it attracts water.
Yeah.
It's charged, and water likes charged things. So it is a water magnet, and that keeps water close to it. Albumin can't leave, and so it's keeping a bunch of water next to it in here, and it tries to pull it towards itself. And so even though the pressure is trying to squeeze it out, magnetics are trying to pull it back in. And the magnetics are oncotic pressure.
So again, what's the force driving both? Like I understand the albumin is pulling the water back in. So water is not leaving as much. It's always going to be leaving, but not to the same extent. But what makes it, like here's the thing I want to understand is like what's making the what's the decline in what's making the water leave in terms of what's the body
Having to get more narrow towards the vein side. The slope always seems to.
So there are 2 questions that I'm not sure which one you're asking. One is, why is some coming back in? And then the other one is, what is...
Controlling the rate.
Controlling the rate. It's an equilibrium. So basically, if you had 3 guys moving boxes out, and you had 2 guys moving boxes in, boxes are moving both ways all the time. The 3 guys with boxes. Let's say that the more they move out, the lazier they get because it's like they're closer to the end of their job. And so they get slower. And eventually 3 guys will be the same speed as 2 guys. So they'll be moving the same amount of boxes. That's what's going on here, sort of, is eventually this pressure, the more water goes out, the weaker it gets. The more water goes out, the weaker it gets. The more blood goes out, the weaker it gets. And eventually it gets to the same level of strength as the oncotic pressure. Stuff is still moving, but it's equal out, equal in. And so the net value stays the same at that point. But if they ask you which side does more come in on, it's the vein side because that's when equilibrium has been hit. Make sense?
What happens to the albumin again? Because it pass through the capillaries, you said?
Yep, it just stays in the blood and keeps going.
And so
All the way around. Same with red blood cells, which don't go through because the holes are too small.
in the case where the oncotic becomes more than the hydrostatic, and then that's when it's pushed back out into the fluid, goes back into the capillaries?
Exactly. So if your oncotic ever gets bigger than your hydrostatic, there's more magnetic pull, more fluid comes in, equalizes after pulling in enough that it raises the pressure to equal it. But if there's more oncotic, it's coming in to the capillary.
Does it also have to do with the osmolarity? Because if there's more albumin than water on the vein side, then water's going to want to come in?
Osmolarity does play in the area. They use oncotic in this particular case, but yes.
What's the name of this equation?
That's a great question.
Okay.
I'll just call everything the Semmelweis equation, which it's not. I don't even think that's in medical science. I'm trying to remember what even the Semmelweis equation is. Where'd that come from? Anyway, detour. All right.
It's called Starling Landis.
Starling Landis.
I thought that the Starling law was the one with the heart, but maybe he has more than one law that has his name in it.
So,
Fix sounds closer.
fix is just about diffusion.
Fix would be involved in this then. He's probably giving you 3 different laws that play into what makes it go out, what makes it go in. What do we call it all together?
Oh, this is solute movement by diffusion. Right here.
Exchange functions. Yeah, that's part of it.
There's one is the exchange rate.
I mean, Starling Landis. Oh yeah, okay. Starling Landis. There's another Starling law for the heart. Yeah, sorry for doubting you.
So the extraction ratio is pertaining to the capillary specific. Yes.
The what ratio?
The extraction.
Extraction ratio is anything that's taking the substance in question out. Most of that happens in the capillaries. All right, because these are fenestrate. Yeah, because otherwise, in other places, tight junctions prevent almost anything going through, unless special cases. Capillaries have holes to let it go through. It's a specialized one that has a hole. Basically, there are 3 types of holes. There's small, medium, and large. Sinusoids are freaking huge. Albumin can make it through those. Fenestrations, I think, are the smallest, but they might be the medium. And those are the ones we're talking about here. And then there's one other one. Basically, the more leaves, the less pressure is left because there's not as much water there or blood. So the pressure drops the more. First, let's talk about diameter of a blood vessel. This one I'm just going to be pretty quick on. If you have a diameter that is, let's actually do, so the radius is half of the diameter. Diameter is all the way across from middle to middle. So if you have a radius that is 2, then to find out the volume of this entire thing, you do pi radius of 2, and then you square that. And so pi r squared, r being 2, that'll give you basically 4 times pi. And we're not going to do the multiplication of pi right here because our purposes, that doesn't matter. Now, if we have a radius of 4, 4 squared is going to be 16. And so we see just by doubling the radius, we increased the amount of volume of blood that can move 4 times. And I found this helpful in understanding things like obstructive air diseases later, like a very slight change in radius. Why does that work? And there's stuff that happens on the inhale and the exhale, and it's like, well, it only moves a little. Why does it do that? This is actually something that helps whenever there's something with a little bubbles.
So when you double the radius, what do you get?
If you double the radius, gases, which are basically fluids. They just happen to be ones that are less dense. So, radius or diameter are extremely important, and more, the volume moving through changes faster than you would expect by intuition most of the time. Okay, so that's point 1. Next point is going to be, vessel had a diameter of 10. And each of these 2 blood vessels coming off, they actually widened up and also had a diameter of 10 each. If the pressure right here was a pressure of 120, answer in your head first, would the pressure over here be above 120? At 120 or below 120. Think about it in your head. Try to figure out why you think it is what it is. Your intuition might give you an answer. Try to reason out why that would be true. And we're going to go ahead and give this 30 seconds because if you understand this, right? If you have a blood vessel that is this big, making the blood vessel smaller would increase the pressure because then there's less room. If you make the blood vessel bigger, then the pressure would go down because there's more room. Pressure and volume have an opposite relationship. Now, the fact that it splits into two blood vessels actually doesn't really matter because if you lay those two blood vessels side by side, the amount of blood that was here is basically now going into, you could just say, a single blood vessel conceptually that has a diameter of 20. So diameter of 10 plus diameter of 10, diameter of 20 is how much space you're getting. And so basically, the more new avenues you open up for blood, the lower the pressure goes. And that's because you have more space. And even a little bit more space makes a big difference. And this is what we see when we do like CrossFit or any kind of any exercise. The muscles that are being used, CrossFit uses your whole body, right? Theoretically, looking crazy because that's where your pressure comes from, is the heart shoving a bunch through, right? But if you open up a whole bunch of new places for the blood to go, that brings it back down. And a matter of fact, it brings it back down so much that we also have something else that happens. The GI usually is using a decent amount of blood, and we actually shut those down. And so we're opening up a whole bunch of new blood vessels. So there's a blood vessel that are usually closed except we're exercising. And that brings the blood pressure that was going really, really high, and we usually just use that one. We open those up, and that brings this back down. And actually, opening these guys up, if you do enough, if you open up enough of them, you can actually bring it so far down that then you're like in danger of passing out. Except then you turn off the GI is usually getting blood, and if you turn that off, then that brings the blood pressure back up. That got a little bit twisty. The thing that you should take away from it is the more vessels being open means pressure goes down. And from that, you can reason out everything else. All right. Is the heart one, for sure. Heart beats faster, stronger. I can't remember the song, but it's great. All right. Do it better. Yeah, all right. Or you can close off blood vessels, which would also increase the blood pressure if you close off blood vessels. To decrease the blood pressure, you open up blood vessels and slow down the heart. This. Dragging against the side of the blood vessel. That's the further the center is away from the walls, the further you keep going like this until you get to the middle where the fastest of all is going. Okay? And so the bigger the blood vessel, the farther from the edge you are in the very middle. And so the higher your maximum laminar speed. Laminar meaning they're all still orderly. What happens when you get to a certain speed where this guy right here is so much slower than the rest of them? Well, you kind of have naughty. And any questions on this or anything else while I'm seeing if there's anything else that we can shoot through? And is while your heart is squeezing, and that has a high pressure because your heart is just squeezed. Diastolic, it's when the heart is relaxing. Systolic minus diastolic gives us what we call pulse pressure. And it's when the heart is relaxing. Systolic minus diastolic gives us what we call pulse pressure. And there are many diseases where if where pulse pressure can be the other one. It should be in there somewhere. I didn't see it. And that's going to be where you have minus 1/3. It should be 2/3 of third weighted, but the math behind that.